Hey folks, this is Ben Schwell, and today I'm going to talk to you about Owain Glyndŵr. You can't go through Welsh history without hearing this name, and it's an important figure to even understand the wider British history, frankly, because his revolt, which was actually a revolution, I'll get to that, was part of something that shaped not just Wales but the entire European continent. So that's what I'm talking about today, focusing on Pennal, which I'll explain in a minute. Before I get to the revolt and the Pennal, which is Pennal Letter, I need to give you some context about the age that we're talking about. The revolt, or the revolution actually, began in the year 1400, but there were events in 1399 certainly already fermenting the explosion of it. But this goes back further in the roots of what allowed it to happen in the first place, 2 generations before. So you had the Black Death, and the social repercussions of this shifted the power structures and destabilized kingdoms across Europe for several generations after, because of the sheer amount of workforce that was killed off. And in some cases, the nobility, there were holes in the aristocracy through which upstarts and usurpers were trying to take advantage of to claim power. And, well, who wants to be a peasant? If there's a chance to get out of it and take someone's place, wouldn't you? And that's exactly what happened in places like modern-day Czech and Sweden, the Engelbrekt Rebellion, which frankly led to the formations of Swedish democracy with roots carrying through all the way to this day. You had rebellions in Catalonia, France, and all across Europe, and part of that was the papacy. It split, it had a schism, arguments over who was the legitimate pope. And from 1379 until 1417, there were 2 popes. But this happened, or rather Glyndŵr's revolution happened, in the middle of this papal schism. And that's significant. And that ties directly into this letter that I'm going to show you. But first, the revolt began in 1400, and throughout the next few years it looked like it was going to succeed. It swept across Wales, taking immense strongholds like Conwy. Conwy Castle in that time was like an impregnable fortress that had been dropped down upon the country from some evil galactic empire. It was unfathomably large, and the Welsh took it. But tides turned, and in 1405 we Welsh lost a battle, Brwydr Melyn, in the southeast. And this was the first pitched battle that the English had won against us. And from this things went a bit bad-weathered for the country. And in the midst of this papal schism, England had aligned with Rome, and France had aligned with Avignon at this point. And so Glyndŵr wrote a letter to Charles VI of France from a village called Pennal, which is right near Machynlleth, which was the capital he was trying to secure for his lands. And so how does he address the King of France? Because this is quite important and suggestive of how revolutionary this letter was. He says to the King of France, "To the most illustrious Prince, the Lord Charles, by the grace of God, King of the French, Owain by the same grace sends the reverence due to such a prince with honor." There's a couple peculiar things that happen in that address. Did you catch them? He addresses the king as a prince first. Right? That's weird. And then he says that he is a prince. And if the prince of France he then addresses as a king and then calls himself a prince, he's saying that he is equal to the King of France. He even goes to the extent to reiterate it, to such a prince. He emphasizes that King Charles is a prince, twice after calling himself a prince. But what he does, which is truly revolutionary here, which breaks all Welsh tradition before him, is he says, by the grace of God, he is invoking divine right to France and his own principality, which he's comparing to the Kingdom of France. No Welsh ruler had invoked such divine right to rule as this before. So what's the next? How does he progress in this letter with the king? Following the advice of our council, we have called together the nobles of our race, the prelates of our principality, and, trusting in the rights of the Lord Benedict, we have determined that the said Lord Benedict shall be recognized as the true victor of Christ in our lands by us and our subjects, and recognize him by these present letters. That one's loaded. Let me break it down. He says council, and back then that was stating that they were holding a national parliament. This is a functioning government in wartime. This is a Welsh state that already exists. Then he goes on to prelates. These are religious officials partaking in the decisions of which pope to recognize in the sphere of international relations for this Welsh state. But just cutting back to the nobles of our race. Who are the nobles and who is the race? The race is the British. And the English at this point did not consider themselves to be British, and that you can see carries on through the following centuries. And they're the nobles of this British race. This was a revolution to create an aristocracy that ruled its own land independent of another aristocracy. This was not so much a revolution of the people, though of course the people saw it would benefit them long term, and they certainly joined up with Glyndŵr in hopes of better, trusting in the rights of Benedict. Now Benedict is Benedict VIII, the papal claimant of Avignon, of which France sided with still at this point. And this was important because you had, Brittany, the Kingdom of Navarre, which would eventually become, what you think of as the Basques, Spain, Portugal. These all sided with Avignon, the Kingdom of Scotland. So he was building an Atlantic confederation against England, and it was just a bit too late because in 1409, Pisan, a third papal claimant, and you had France and Portugal turning against. And he's saying, trusting in the rights given by God. He's claiming divine right in this revolution. There's no acknowledging English law here. He's claiming a higher power than the English state. So on this ecclesiastical note and divine right, he then goes on to hark back to ancient Welsh history, what was already ancient in this period. And he says this: the church, to Thou, shall be restored to its original dignity, which from the time of Saint David, Archbishop and Confessor, was a metropolitan church, and after his death 24 archbishops succeeded him in the same place, and their names are continued in the chronicles and ancient books of Menevia. There are two main things happening here. First of all, he's going back to Saint David at Saint David's, or to Thou in Welsh. Who is the principal Welsh religious national figure, which happened a millennium before Glyndŵr in this letter. And he's saying all those bishops, which that's how England saw them, they are saying that these are archbishops, independent of another see. We are elevating the rank of 1,000 years of bishops to archbishop. And then he's saying we have evidence in our ancient books, echoing the word Menevia, which is, in this time it would have felt classical, connecting almost to a post-Roman era. So he's creating a national romantic image here, and then promoting the offices of his own land. So in harking back to that word Menevia, the ancient word for that St. David's region, what does he go on to then do next? He's laid the foundation, and then he goes on to say what's happening to our country and what we're fighting for. For being crushed by the fury of the barbarous Saxons, who usurped themselves the land of Wales. They trampled upon the aforementioned Church of St. David's, and made her the handmaid to the Church of Canterbury. Again, the same Lord Benedict shall provide for the Metropolitan Church of St. David's and the other cathedral churches of our principality, prelates, dignitaries and beneficed clergy and curates who know our language, barbarous Saxons. Those are Glyndŵr's words for who the English are to him, not mine. And he then compares Wales to a handmaid being defiled by these impure barbarians. And Canterbury, this is the main ecclesiastical centre in England. And he's saying, no, we are separate apart. We have our own ecclesiastical independence by right. That metropolitan there, it's a holy see. It's an archbishopric. It's independent of being controlled by another ecclesiastical state. The Catholic Church was very layered, and there was always competitions for who controlled which cathedrals. And he's saying, we have an alpha cathedral, not dominated by another. But he goes on, almost as if listing the cost he expects them to pay for his allegiance to Benedict in Avignon, France. He expects that these religious clergy and officers, which will sprinkle his kingdom and spread French and papal influence, that they will know the Welsh language. He expects them to be trained in Welsh. He demands that Welsh is on par with French and Latin. That's revolutionary even today. Our MPs are not allowed to stand up in our own parliament, Westminster, and give a speech in our own language for the sake of representing our own country. And yet Glyndŵr was saying then, the highest offices in the land will be Welsh-speaking if you expect our allegiance in military affairs. So what does he go on about the type of Wales that he will build after knowing that it will certainly be Welsh-speaking? Lord Benedict shall concede to yous and to our heirs, the princes of Wales, that our chapels, etc., shall be free, and shall rejoice in the privileges, exemptions, and immunities in which they rejoiced in the times of our forefathers, the princes of Wales. So that quote's actually going back more than forward, which I'll get to in a bit. But he's evoking the title, that the Prince of Wales, that right. And he's saying that this revolution is about the privileges of the aristocracy. And what's that word? Immunities. He's saying that those who rule over this land will be immune from certain laws and exempt from certain obligation or taxes due to their privilege and aristocratic status. That's what he's saying. That they have inherited these rights as the rightful rulers of Wales by God and by birth. So what about the future of this revolution? What did he want? Again, that we shall have 2 universities, or places of studia generalia, namely, one in North Wales and the other in South Wales, in cities, towns, or places to be hereafter decided and determined by our ambassadors and nuncios for that purpose. Now there's probably a couple bits of language that weren't exactly familiar to you. First of all, Studia Generalia. This was a broad general study in medieval universities of a certain top-tier type, in which they were allowed and permitted to circulate the best and most modern texts of the day to expand and contribute to knowledge. So you had Padua, Paris, Oxford and Cambridge, Vienna. These were all of that genre, and he was saying we're going to build two of these elite universities. This one in the north, one in the south, he was trying, it looks, to build a triangle. Okay, so you had Machynlleth, probably in the middle, out on a wing a bit, and then Spokes with a university in the north, just north of it, and probably one a bit further south of it. And so he was trying to build a cultural and economic heartland, much like the English have done with the home counties in their country. He was trying to build a Welsh home county administration-based system for the upper crust of Welsh society. But those ambassadors and nuncios, that's peculiar, because nuncio, these are officers of the Pope administration and allowing the Pope to have influence and France to have influence in his kingdom or principality. And he does use the word principality to describe Wales, which I know many Welsh nationalists may be at odds today with that. But your greatest ever rebel leader called Wales a principality. And that fellow, that Pope Benedict, he actually was petitioned by Scotland, the Bishop of St. Andrews, Henry, I'll put his name here. And St. Andrews was founded as a university in 1413. They went down the exact path that Owain Glyndŵr was trying to go down. So this was very possible. He was very practical, he was very modern, he was very of his time. But speaking of time, this video is already a bit long, and I just want to end on the note that there's no reason at all this revolt, which was a revolution, should have failed. Others across Europe did under the same circumstances. It's just that when I look at Glyndŵr, I see one tiny flaw. He rose up in revolt just a couple years too late to take full advantage of the weakened king in England first, and more importantly, the schism and the papacy. And he hesitates a couple times in his war, just at incredibly tight moments. And if he had been a bit less patient, there's no question in my mind, England would not have stood a chance. Everything was on his side. Glyndŵr is a figure that I think we gravely misunderstand, and we try and pit it of this romantic hero in isolation. But he was part of a wider European civilization, and a context that was extremely European at the time. Would you like more videos on him? Let me know if you do, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in. Diolch yn fawr. Hwyl fawr.